WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisCI to 44321.
Senator Patrick Testin of Stevens Point is the Republican incumbent candidate for the 24th Senate District. The election is November 5th. Senator Testin, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for participating in our interviews. What is your campaign's key message? Why are you running again for this office?
Well, I'm running for my third term because I feel like there's still a lot more work that needs to be done, primarily to make Wisconsin more competitive. We face a number of different challenges, whether it's workforce related, whether it's our tax climate. And as I often tell people, we are in direct competition with 49 other states, and we have to do a much better job of selling ourselves. I think sometimes we're too humble, too modest as Wisconsinites, but if we want to have a competitive economy, if we want to grow, we have to attract new opportunities here and also retain what we have.
If you're reelected, what's an example of another piece of legislation that you would prioritize introducing?
I would say my top priority is legislation that I've authored these last two sessions that unfortunately has been vetoed, and that's dealing with our advanced practice registered nurses, allowing our APRNs to operate at the highest level of their scope of practice. Unfortunately, Wisconsin is one of these states that limits their ability, and one of the highlights, if there were any from the pandemic, is that we rolled back some of these restrictions for our APRNs to deliver health care, and the good news is that they stepped up to the plate and provide great quality care. And at a time when we face so many provider shortages, especially in rural areas of our state, we should be doing what we can to empower our providers to do the jobs they were trained to do, which is to take care of patients, especially in underserved areas.
You know this, that if you're reelected, you'll be entering during a budget year. The state's projected to have more than a $3 billion surplus. What would be, say, your top two priorities for use of that surplus?
Well, I would say the top priority is providing significant tax relief. This is one of these areas that we tried to do in not just this last budget, the previous budget as well, that the governor signed into law. Unfortunately, this last go around, 95% of the tax cuts that we proposed were vetoed. And that's obviously the governor's prerogative. But as I'm going out through communities I represent in places like Stevens Point, Wisconsin Rapids, Mauston, Toma, I hear it directly from voters who are being impacted by high prices, high inflation, and one of the best ways we can provide relief is to ensure that they take home more of their paycheck. And again, if we want to be competitive, we have to look around us. I mean, the state of Illinois is a flat tax. Iowa is on the path to a flat tax over the next couple of years. And right now, Wisconsin and Minnesota are outliers here in the Midwest. And one of the most consequential votes someone can make is with their feet. Now, anyone can go to a ballot box and elect their elected officials at every level of government, but people want to go to places where they know their dollar stretches further. And if we want to attract new opportunities, we need to make sure that we have a tax environment that allows them to do so.
So you support the flat tax?
Absolutely.
What about spending? Is there any particular area of the budget that you think needs more state funding investment?
Sure. I think there's a couple areas. Infrastructure in particular. In this last budget, we did $150 million for a new program called ARIP for our heavy ag used roads. And of that $150 million, of the first $50 million in grants that went out, there were over $200 million in applications. So that just goes to show that there is a huge need. And over these last couple budgets, we have done a really good job of making sure that we are bonding less in our DOT budget, while also providing the use of one-time funds going back to our rural communities that oftentimes felt like they were being left behind compared to some of the mega projects in places like southeast Wisconsin, which are critically important as well. But we need to make sure that every area of our infrastructure is being adequately funded. And as the DOT lead on the Joint Finance Committee for the Senate Republicans, I was really proud of the work that we did, but it just goes to show that there's more funds that need to go back to these communities, and that's what I'm going to be advocating for in this budget.
What about K-12 education? It's a leading issue for many voters. Where does that land in your priorities?
Yeah, also a big making sure that our students have adequate resources within the classroom. This last budget, the state finally, after years, made our commitment of 2/3 funding for K-12 education. But I still think there needs to be a broader conversation, because the way our school funding formula is set up currently, it really provides a system of haves and have-nots, where in many of our rural districts, they're trying to do more with less. And it's going to require a lot of conversation, and it's going to require a lot of give and take from K-12, both large and small districts all across our state, to address how our school funding formula is handled. Because it's very old, it's archaic, and there have been blue ribbon commissions year after year that kind of nibble around the edges but don't actually tackle the root cause of the problem. Ideally, it would be great where the dollar follows the child, but obviously we have so many different pots of funds and different programs, like for sparsity aid and transportation, things of that nature. But I do think we have to revamp that to ensure that we have a more equitable funding formula that ensures every child here in the state has access to high quality education.
Do you think this is the legislative session to tackle school funding reform?
Well, we'll see. We got shared revenue done this last go around, and many people thought that was going to be a Herculean task, too heavy to ever get done. But thanks to leadership in both houses and along with the Evers administration, we came up with a really good compromise, providing more funds going back to our local communities, which was long overdue, 30 years in the making. So I think if there's an appetite and there's a will from parties involved, that we can accomplish anything.
What about higher education? 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, technical colleges. What do you see as the future of that whole system, and where should the legislature be focusing?
Well, I think we need to focus our investments as it relates to higher education where the needs are within the workforce. Our tech colleges have done a tremendous job in recent years preparing our students, doing more with dual enrollment so students can get through the door quicker with less debt, which I think is a goal for both the technical college system as well as the UW system. And making sure that we have a UW system that is preparing the future workforce of the state. It's a huge economic driver here in the state of Wisconsin. But one of the challenges that I see as we've seen decline in enrollments in a number of our universities is that one of the challenges that we've had over the last 50 years is that our university systems have become something for everyone. And as a result, we have many departments and programs where there's not many students enrolled in that. And when the system was initially created back in the 70s, you would have your 2 flagship universities like Madison, like UW-Milwaukee, and your 13 satellite schools that would specialize in key areas. I think we need to get back to those key principles of what that system was initially founded on. So you have universities like UWSP, for example, where they specialize in natural resources, paper sciences, places like La Crosse, education, things of that nature, Platteville engineering. And I think if we can retool and get back to those basics, it's going to set ourselves up for success in the long term.
Are you willing to invest more money in that Universities of Wisconsin system along with some of those types of reforms then?
Yeah, absolutely. If they're willing to come to the table and they have a strong case to be made, I'm always open to any and all ideas.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how would you propose to address it?
It's our demographics right now. That is the biggest challenge. So when I first ran in 2016, it would amaze me when I'd go door to door and I'd ask people, hey, what do you do for work? And they would tell me, well, I can't find a job. And I'd always sort of chuckle and laugh and ask them, you can see me, right? And they would always say, yeah, I see you. Well, then you're not looking for work. Because every community, large and small, every business, large and small, has had help wanted signs in their storefront windows. I mean, I've often said if a help wanted sign was a political candidate, they'd feel really good on election day that they're going to win. But the truth is that as our demographics age, our population that's 65 or older are set to retire, our birth rates haven't been at the replacement levels that they need to be since the 1970s. We are behind the 8 ball. So if we're not doing what we can to retain the workforce that we have and retool and retrain individuals and also attract from outside of the state, we're going to remain struggling for our employers. It's one of the primary reasons why, since I've been in office, once a month I go out and do my On the Job series to highlight what great jobs and opportunities that we have in central and western Wisconsin. And if it's something I can do, anyone should be able to do it. And showing that there is dignity in all forms of work, and that's why you've seen in recent years critical investments in our youth apprenticeship program, allowing students to get real hands-on experience and get a feel for different career fields, and also to figure out, you know what, if it's not for me, they can go into something else. And it allows these employers to invest in that next generation of workers and hopefully build them up and have a long-term employee. I can think of a few manufacturers in my area like Martin Machining. They have youth apprenticeships who started off back in the 90s when the program first started, who are still working with them today. And that is a prime example of the success of these programs and why I hope we can continue to invest in them going into the next budget.
Another workforce question for you. Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. They also provide an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
I'm not sure that it's needed just because of the demand that's out there. I mean, you go on the Job Center of Wisconsin's website, and this has been a trend for the last several years. Anywhere from 80 to 130,000 jobs are available in the state of Wisconsin right now. Employers are so desperate, and that's why they're willing to invest in their future workers. Why you're seeing signing on bonuses for jobs that just even 7-8 years ago were paying minimum wage that are now offering sign-on bonuses of $2,000, paying upwards of $15, $16 an hour because they are so desperate for workers. So I don't know if a requirement like that is necessary at this time.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this, and what do you think should be done about it?
Yeah, we've had some conversations with the Department of Workforce Development, and it's important to know that we have statutes on the books, and if there's an enforcement issue that needs to be addressed, then certainly that's something that we'll have to take a look at in the next budget. And I know the Evers administration has been having conversations about reclassifying, especially independent contractors, but the concern that I have if we don't stick with the status quo is that oftentimes that has the likelihood of increasing cost. And oftentimes when businesses have increased costs, they pass it on to consumers. And at a time where we're seeing 40-year high inflation, that's a real concern for me and for folks I represent. And so my hope is that status quo remains, and if enforcement's an issue, then they need to come to the legislature and let us know what they need.
Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some support government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability, rent control or building more rentals?
Well, I don't think having a rent control is the solution. When you take a look at what we accomplished in this last session, over $500 million were spent in affordable housing projects and programs, providing new homeowners the ability to update old housing stock, which I think roughly 60% or more of the housing stock in the state of Wisconsin was built well before 1980. But more importantly, I think if we really want to help lower costs as it relates to rent and affordability, is taking a look at what we can do on the regulatory standpoint, because right now for new construction, 1/3 of the cost of new construction is tied up in red tape and regulation. Now, obviously, regulation plays a key role as far as safety, but I think we can take a look at it and see what layers of that onion can we peel back that is going to streamline the process for developers to come into communities, especially in smaller ones where we have a number of programs available that oftentimes get gobbled up by larger municipalities and cities, whereas affordable housing in rural Wisconsin gets oftentimes left behind. So I think there are a number of different ways that we can address this without imposing rent controls, which have been done in other states and hasn't really borne much fruit.
Moving on to health care. Medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
Well, this has certainly had a ripple effect, and many healthcare systems are seeing similar trends right now. And I don't think there's any silver bullet that's going to solve this problem because it's so multifaceted. We have a provider shortage right now. We have excess mandates coming down from both the federal as well as the state level that are putting a tremendous hamper on our system's ability to do the jobs that they are supposed to be doing, which is take care of patients. And when you take a look even at the entry-level positions within our healthcare workforce, CNAs, for example, a nursing home, if they don't have CNAs, they can't take new patients into their facilities. So oftentimes you have patients who are staying in hospitals much longer than they need to be, where the cost of care is the highest to take care of that. And it has this ripple effect. That's one of the reasons, and I wish we would have got this through, was the complex patient rehab program across the finish line, providing different pathways and opportunities to get these patients who have been in hospital with high acuity into a post-acute facility to receive care, which frees up beds. And then the other issue, too, is making sure that hospitals have a healthy mix of their payers or payees. The issues that we saw up in the Eau Claire area, heavy on Medicaid. It's one of the primary reasons why in the last several budgets that we have baked into the base budget is our disproportionate share of Medicaid for our critical access hospitals. Now, at the time, I was critical of it, but in hindsight, it makes a lot of sense, and it's going to help ease that burden moving forward. But it's certainly a struggle, and anything that we can do at the state to help alleviate those concerns, you better believe that the legislative Republicans are going to continue to tackle this and tackle it head on.
What about mental health care? It's a growing concern for many Wisconsinites. It's a concern for state and county budgets. What are you hearing about this in your district, and how would you further address mental health care?
I think this is one of those issues in hyper-polarized times that you see broad consensus that Republicans, Democrats coming together to address these issues, because I'm a firm believer we need to be more preventative, because anything that we can spend on the front end not only saves us long term, but it provides better outcomes for patients, whether it's dealing with Chapter 51 cases. This is one issue I hear a lot from law enforcement officials in my neck of the woods, where they come across an individual who's having a mental health crisis, and then to try and find them a bed in places like Winnebago or Mendota. Oftentimes, if it's a very complex case, a bed that may have been available just a few minutes prior no longer is. Or if they are able to find a bed for them, they then have to transport this individual, which oftentimes probably not the best place for this individual to be, is handcuffed in the back of a cop car, being driven 3-4 hours across the state and having 2 deputies go with. Now you're taking individuals out of their own community of public safety. So I think there are ways we can address this. Having a hub and spoke model, this was a thing that was championed by former state senator Kathy Bernier, and I think it's the right approach, where you have these facilities where they can come in, get evaluated, get treatment, and hopefully have outpatient treatment where they have wraparound services to hopefully provide better outcomes, so that we're not just throwing a Band-Aid on a broken leg and hoping that it's going to fix itself.
How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
This is an issue that I think we have to address. So for 51 years, in the wake of Roe v. Wade, folks at the federal level would always punt and say it's a state issue. Folks at the state level would say, well, it's a settled court issue. In the wake of the Dobbs decision, well, now it's an issue that we have to legislate and navigate through. I'm someone who, I consider myself very pro-life, but yet, there are certain circumstances in place and things of rape, incest, life of the mother that I think definitely need to be addressed. And it was a really tough decision for me to sign on to the legislation that would take it down from a 20-week ban down to a 14, but more importantly, take it to the voters. I think just about every legislative office has sent out surveys on this, and people are all across the board as it relates to how to handle abortion. I think most people are in agreement that having exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother are appropriate. And after that, there are individuals who believe there should be no abortion. There are others who believe it should be 20 weeks or 14 weeks. So I think this is one of these issues that hopefully next session we can reintroduce that legislation and hopefully take it to the voters to get their say and their opinion on it.
You mentioned some transportation priorities in your platform. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce? Well,
you take a look at this last budget, and I was really proud of what we got done. So when I was first elected in 2016, I think we were bonding roughly 20 to 22 cents on the dollar. That's really not a good place that you want to be for long-term longevity. Now we're down, I believe, to around 12 cents on the dollar, which is a pretty healthy place to be. I'd like to be a little bit lower than that. But last session, we used one-time cash to pay for many of these projects. Now, depending on how revenues look moving forward, if it's a $3 billion surplus or more, I think we need to take a look at the programs like the ARIP program, the LRIP program. Obviously, there's huge demand, and I think that's where we need to have the focus, is making sure that our rural communities are being brought up to par, because I hear from town officials all the time that they're basically, again, not to use the same analogy, putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. We need to build up our infrastructure in all corners of the state if we want to make sure that we have a vibrant economy for commerce.
Environment. PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how do you propose to address it?
Well, I think this was one of the great missed opportunities by the Evers administration. Again, early on, I was rather optimistic. This is an issue that Republicans and Democrats in the past have come together on, going back to 2019 when Governor Evers declared the Year of Clean Drinking Water. And shortly after that, Speaker Voss announced the Task Force on Water Quality. And historically, Speaker Task Force never involved the Senate. But I personally reached out to the Speaker and said, look, this is a very important issue, especially in my neck of the woods where we have the Central Sands. We need to have both houses involved. And so the Senate was included. We went around the state and we heard the concerns, whether it was dealing with nitrates, phosphorus, PFAS, and passed, it was roughly a dozen bills that were great steps, great measures as it relates to PFAS. In our last budget, $125 million was set aside in the JFC supplemental account contingent upon legislation being signed into law. We sent that bill to Governor Evers. Unfortunately, that bill got vetoed. I think it was the wrong course of action, and quite frankly, a mistake. But my hope is that we'll revive that legislation. Hopefully, since we'll be out of a campaign season, the politics won't be involved, and we can actually roll up our sleeves and address this. But I firmly believe the $125 million we set aside is just the tip of the iceberg as it relates to dealing with PFAS contamination. As we learn more, we need to do a better job, but this is a start in the right direction to start having these conversations and providing relief for homeowners and communities all across the state.
We're down to our final two questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
Well, I would say experience. You know, I've had the privilege to serve the 24th Senate District for the last 7.5 years. I'm hoping to have a third term. And I think I've proven I'm someone who can work across the aisle, work with my Democrats. In fact, when I was first elected, I made it a point to go door to door to my Democratic colleagues and say, hey, if you guys have an idea you think we can work together on, my door's open. And the ones that took me up on that would sit at a table just like this. We would define the playing field, and we'd get bills done and get bills signed into law. As far as my opponent, I don't know much about him. He's a recent graduate from UWSP. Aside from that, I don't know a whole lot about what he's running on. It wasn't until recently that issues were added to his campaign website. By all accounts, he seems like a nice guy, but my approach remains the same. I'm going to go out there every day and have conversations with the people I represent, and I'm asking folks for their support on November 5th.
Final question. Let's say you're reelected and you get this magic wand you can use in the state capitol and use it to resolve one issue in a way that brings all parties together. What's the issue? I
think one issue, magic wand, I really hope that we can tone down the rhetoric in our politics. You know, we can have our differences of opinion, but what really disheartens me is that when we see the politics of personality, it rips people apart, it rips families apart. I wish we can focus on the issues, understanding that we may not always agree. And I come from a place, my parents are Democrats, I still love them. I always get a kick when I come across people at parades and say, well, I'm a Democrat. And I look at them and say, so are my parents, I still talk to them. But I think if we could focus on the issues at hand, lay out our different visions for the state, I think that would go a long way in toning down some of the rhetoric and some of the heat that we've seen in our politics in recent years.
Well, thank you, Senator Patrick Testin, the Republican incumbent candidate from Stevens Point, candidate for the 24th Senate District. The election is November 5th. Senator Testin, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thanks for having me.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.